Welcome to Worldbuild with us, the podcast where we create fantastical worlds with help from you, our listeners. My name is Rob Hilferty. I'm here with my co-hosts Daniel Quinn and Chris Prunty. On today's episode, we are #blessed to be graced with Rich Baker, legendary game designer, and he literally wrote the book on world building. So we're going to cut to that interview now. Today, we are honored to have legendary game designer, author, and all sorts of other good things, Richard Baker, here with us today. Richard, thank you so much for joining us. And for those of you, for the people who might not know who you are, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, hey, first of all, it's great to be here. I'm Richard Baker. I have been a game designer since 1991. I started with TSR Incorporated way back in Wisconsin, all the way back in D&D Second Edition. I stayed with TSR when they were bought by Wizards of the Coast and moved out to the Seattle area and worked with Wizards of the Coast until 2011. And from 2011 until just earlier this year, I was basically working for myself as a freelance writer and part-time owner of a small game business and author, writing my own sci-fi and stuff. My day job these days is I do some writing for the Elder Scrolls Online game. And in the evenings, I'm still working like heck on my own fiction. During the time, I have also published a number of books, mostly a lot of novels for the Forgotten Realms setting for D&D, plus my own original military sci-fi series, Breaker of Empires. The most recent book of which, Scornful Stars, came out in December of 2019. And I'm also doing some fiction for the Torg universe for Ulysses, which is a fun, wacky, multiple reality sci-fi fantasy universe, which longtime gamers probably would recognize. So lots of fun stuff.
That is a breath and a half worth of work, and my God, we have so much to get into. Yeah, so I know that a lot of people are probably really interested. I mean, getting to work for TSR in the early '90s and seeing that transition, like what was that process like? How did you get started? I mean,
Well, I started at TSR mostly because I had gotten out of the Navy. I was on active duty in the Navy, naval officer from '88 to '91. And when I was getting out of the service, seeing as we pretty much won the Cold War and taken care of Saddam Hussein the first time around, I figured my work was done. Um, I was sending resumes out to everybody. Way back in the day when you'd actually like send people paper resumes. So I said, you know what? I'm just going to waste a stamp, and I'm going to send a resume to TSR Incorporated for the pure hell of it, because boy, I like D&D, and sure, it would be fun to be a writer. And to my surprise, they actually answered my unsolicited resume and said, "Well, hey, here's a design test." They sent me a complete Vikings handbook, second edition, one of the historical reference books. You might remember the green leatherette ones they had. And they said, and we're going to give you a design test. Write 2,000 word encounter based on material in this book. So I was like, awesome. I am up a complete Vikings handbook.
All right.
But whatever I wrote, they appeared to like it well enough. They brought me out for an interview. And a few months after I got out of the Navy, I started at TSR as a game designer and went on to begin. I did my very first project was the Spelljammer sourcebook, Rock of Brawl. And then I moved on and did a lot of work in Dark Sun in second edition. And, hey, as they say, the rest is history.
And it's a long and storied history for sure.
So, TSR is something that's really near and dear to my heart because that's where I started, was like right on the cusp between second and third edition.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, so I've got a lot of questions for you, but I tried to narrow them down. The first question is more of a culture and kind of proto-internet question. In that time, we're talking before 2000. For a lot of our listeners who are a lot younger, they're used to being always on the web. So what was it like, working on products like the Wizard Spell Compendium or any of the really huge books that were produced by TSR back then without the internet, without sophisticated technology, and you had to rely just on what was in your grasp, basically?
Um, we actually had a fairly significant library in the TSR building. We had two of them actually. One was a game library, which obviously was full of all sorts of our own stuff and competitor stuff. So we'd always be in there at lunchtimes playing games. We also had a pretty big reference library that had been assembled by SPI, a war game company that TSR had bought in the late '80s, and there was some weird stuff in there. So, for example, when I was researching guns for the original Alternity game, I found a book in there uh, called entitled "To Ride, to Shoot, and to Speak the Truth." And it was written by a guy who was like a professional mercenary, and he had gone all over the world and like fought like in the like the Congolese Civil War, and he was like just crazy stuff, right? And this guy had the habit of like referring to everybody that he all the bad guys he ever fought as like orcs and goblins. It's like you'll be reading this guy, and he's like, well, you might be out there in the field, and all of a sudden two orcs kind of jump up with AK-47s, and you're going to need to drop them in a hurry. So then he'd get to the stopping power arguments about different sorts of pistols, and it's like, all right, this guy is nuts, but it's really interesting.
I'm speechless, but also I'm thinking of that Warren Zevon song, "Rollin' the Headless
Oh
Thompson."
yeah, all the stuff's together. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and I'm like, oh, it's that guy. It's
yeah.
basically that guy from the song.
It really was. It really was.
Oh man.
Wow.
So the massive library, I imagine, helped a lot. I remember listening to a lot of commentary on The Simpsons, like comedy book or the comedy room. And they're basically, look, we had like six guys, and two knew a lot about baseball, one knew a lot about science, and that's kind of where we started. I imagine that, in TSR, it wasn't probably that much larger of a team than a writer's room.
It was actually a pretty sizable department. At one point we had, I think, close to 30 writers and editors all in the creative department.
Wow.
So pretty good size, bigger than a typical writer's room, I think.
Oh wow, yeah, that's much larger than anticipated. So again, this is like or this is early '90s that you're joining on. So you've kind of missed the wave of cocaine that the '80s have brought on, and I'm sure that was rampant in TSR at the time. So
I gotta say, like one of the very first things, the very first day I went to work, a couple of my new coworkers took me out to lunch. Um, Bill Connors and Dave Sutherland, and they took me out to lunch. We went to the Pizza Hut in Lake Geneva, and I said, "Okay, guys, I'm just curious because I've never heard the story. What's really the deal? What happened with Gary? Why is he no longer the man in charge here?" And so I didn't get the whole story until I actually worked there. I got it the first day I was there over lunch.
oh my god, that's crazy.
It's like
Yeah.
cryptic knowledge. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh geez.
I'm not sure how much you're allowed to disclose. You said earlier you can't talk about the Elder Scrolls, but more of writing in another setting that is someone else's. Like, do you have to sit out and do a bunch of research on it? Is there like a creative team there that is like, it's just like, oh well, that's not lore friendly or anything?
Oh yeah. They're. I don't think I'm telling any tales out of school when I say that they're very very serious about really maintaining the lore, not just within Elder Scrolls Online, but also in respects to the various other Elder Scrolls games and the whole family of properties there. Obviously, there's been a lot of console games that aren't take place in different time eras than Elder Scrolls Online, and we're always looking at what's been done there and making sure we're not stepping on any toes. So yeah, one of my coworkers actually has the official job title of lore master.
Oh, that's an awesome job title.
So yeah, I mean, it's there's something they take seriously, and obviously a lot of times, anytime I'm writing something that has any implications for the setting, I'm digging in and being very careful about what I'm coming up with.
So I'm assuming that there's some kind of like a setting Bible or like a guideline or like a house rules type thing.
Oh
Can you
yeah,
tell
yeah.
us about like the thickest setting book that you've ever seen? Like these are the guidelines, like this is the gospel, or is that something that's maybe we should skip?
No, that's okay. I think actually the probably the biggest, most thorough one that I can remember was the Forgotten Realms Bible.
Oh boy.
Oh yeah.
Um, and the reason was not because we necessarily felt like there was that much stuff that we were anxious about contradicting. It was more a matter of the fact that Ed Greenwood is a human volcano of knowledge and interests, and just kept producing over the course of his association with that property, just this immense amount of in many cases just trivia about the realms, right? Like, how do they brush their teeth? Well, doesn't come up in gameplay very often, but if you asked Ed,
You knew.
how do people brush their teeth in the realms? He would have answers. And you know what? And they'd be different for different countries, right?
Wow.
Well, in Luskin, of course, they do this, but over in the Dale Lands, they instead do blah, 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 blah. It's like,
And that's just the stuff
yeah,
that made the Bible that you had to read. Like I'm sure that they had additional lore, right?
yeah.
Oh
In
man.
fact, the funny thing is, in a lot of ways, Jeff Grubb, when he was the guy who put together that first Forgotten Realms box, the huge mass of his job, frankly, was looking at this amazing amount of material that Ed had created over the years for his fantasy world, and trying to figure out how to organize and present it, and what parts of that could needed to be in the book, and what parts didn't need to be in the book. But even after the gray box back in the day had come out, we still had this Bible that was probably the size of a small phone book. Uh, of hey, if there's something that you really need to know, you can probably go and dig around in here and see if it's been touched on, or what we think we know about it.
Man, I don't know how to phrase this, but one of the major reasons that I was so excited to talking to you is that you're literally the writer for How to World Build. Is that correct?
That's correct.
I did. I wrote in the mid-90s a book called the World Builder's Guidebook. Yeah.
Yeah. So obviously on a podcast like World Build with us, I mean, you can tell that we're pretty excited. But given that you've developed like Forgotten Realms, Birthright, Alternity, you've worked on Planescape, Ravenloft, uh, and the literal book on how to world build, what would you, can you give us like your top 2 tips on world building?
My top 2 tips.
I know that's an
Yeah.
incredibly broad question, but like I always like to point them out. Like each most people tend to have pillars that they look at when it comes to world building. Some people prefer culture, some people prefer magic systems, mechanics over setting and whatnot. I just kind of want to know what your process is, or at least now, I suppose, because things change.
Sure. I mean, in terms of approach, the 2 bits of advice I would give right up front is it's perfectly fine to start small and build a micro setting, build a town, build a dungeon, and work out from there. Don't feel like you have to design the whole world from whole continents first before you can even get started. The second thing I would point out is it's perfectly fine in a lot of cases to do your world building like like the way Hollywood builds a movie set, right? You only have to pay attention to the parts that face the players, right? If the players aren't going to see something, it's behind the facade.
Are you saying that we don't need to learn how to brush our teeth in different countries?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Um, I'll add a third point too, and this is actually something that I think I've figured out since then. I probably would have made a bigger effort to put in the World Builder's Guidebook if I had known it back in the mid '90s. The tricky bit about RPG settings is you don't know who the heroes are, really, right? Because the heroes are the player characters, and that's you have really no idea at any given table what sorts of people are showing up and are playing in your game. So instead of necessarily spending a lot of time and effort designing what you think the heroes are, although sometimes it's useful to be able to answer the question, who are the heroes in the world and what they do, is kind of useful to know. start with the bad guys. Do you have a great idea for a villain? Do you have a great idea for a monster species of villains? For a culture or a society that could be really bad guys and fun to fight against. Um, you would be amazed at how much of your world building can hang on just a good distinctive set of bad guys and people that your players will come to know and appreciate and really dislike will will buy you a whole lot of time to work out the details.
That is probably one of the that bit right there is so astute and so like in line with what I'm excited about when it comes to world building. I mean, we often talk about, you know, what should or should not go into settings and everything like that. And when it comes to stuff that's truly vile, especially when there are real world consequences to such things, I always say that's like sometimes you want that little bit of vileness in there just so you can have the heroes come and smash it. Like
Yeah,
I always find it so important. Like there's a reason that Nazis make it into every like superhero book. And it's not just because of the history there. It's also because you know what's really fun? Punching Nazis in the face. No one ever. Nazis are the orc equivalent, you know, in terms of like the superhero setting. No one ever feels bad about that.
I sort of feel that, and yeah, and I've so far managed to kind of refrain from a lot of the huge debates on this because, man, uh, it is tough to get involved in social media debates these days. But I think actually the core fantasy of D&D is the idea, or any fantasy world or action-based property, is the idea that um, evil can be solved by punching it. Right? Yeah, I mean, in our own world, I mean, yeah, sometimes we have to invade Normandy, and we can tell ourselves we're on a righteous crusade to liberate Europe, and that's mostly correct. But it's
Mm-hmm.
just everything is fraught with consequences and unintended consequences and hard choices and compromises. And the beauty and simplicity of an RPG is you can make the world better and pretend that you can make the world better by just defeating a bad guy physically and walking away and saying that guy's not a problem anymore. That's a wonderful bit of flight of fantasy to be able to indulge in, and it makes a world simple and heroic.
And there's a sense of accomplishment there. Like there's no like, oh, I have to worry about the implications of defeating the Grand Lich Narzul. It's like, no, I can just defeat him and his armies, and then things will get better. There's the implication of
Yeah,
the happy ending, right?
yeah,
Whereas if this were real life, guess what? You'd probably have to get stuck into, you know, dozens of years rebuilding Nerzul's fallen Lich Kingdom. You know, like there is something about RPGs that is like I was talking about with comic books earlier. I mean, there's something simple about that. You know, like you don't have to worry about the implications anymore. And also, don't ever feel bad about getting into a conversation on social media. As someone who has a podcast, social media is a cesspool. Um, well and truly, I've never felt comfortable having meaningful conversations on Twitter or even Facebook because I really don't feel like you get the same impact, you know, online as though you're having an actual phone call or conversation face to face. I just don't really feel like it's there nearly.
oh yeah,
Yeah, like on the subject of what RPGs are, you wrote once, I have a long held belief that D&D is not actually a game, it's a simulation. Games have objectives and winning conditions, and simulations are imaginary worlds defined only by a set of physics. And you were talking to some degree about the differences between first, second, even bits of third edition as a transition to fourth and modern RPGs. Could you tell us a little bit about what you meant by RPG as simulation and how you view the RPG as different than your average game?
um, sure, and boy, that's actually that. I have had that thought a few times. I was mostly arguing. This came up in the context in examining like design of like third edition D&D and fourth edition D&D and kind of comparing and contrasting. Um, uh, and this is actually if you want to dig up a fascinating and probably mostly dead thread somewhere on the internet, It's the metaphor of D&D as football or D&D as war. And if you look at D&D as football, you realize that, okay, we all agree that, we're going to play, try to get the football into the end zone by doing things such as lining up and running a play and realizing that people can stand only in certain places. And if people are standing in the wrong places, we can't run the play. We're not going to do things like calling an airstrike on the other team and then walk the ball over to the goal line over their smoldering corpses and say we won. Right, because that wasn't the goal. The goal was to have fun, to have a competition, right? D&D is it might have been D is competition as opposed to war, right? And fourth edition really, I think, embraces the D&D as competition philosophy, because many of the balance features of fourth edition and the way different character abilities work between like the at-will powers and the encounter powers, things like that. A lot of those are designed to present here's a fun scenario in which you try to see how you can maximize your usage of your character's powers by coloring within the lines and to play a game and see if you can win the game. D&D as simulation is the idea that there is no particular endpoint. There is no particular win condition. There is no recommended method where we say you are doing it right if you do it this way, or doing it wrong if you do it the other way. In the D&D as a simulation philosophy, you might have the question of, well, okay, there's a evil fortress filled with orcs, and we need to retrieve an artifact from it. As a game, you might look around and say, well, okay, we know that the gamified D&D is built all around having interesting, challenging fights and looking to maximize our advantages in those fights, and maybe looking for a way to fight our way to the fortress and get the artifact. D&D as simulation does things like, let's see if we can capture an important orc, hit him with a dominate person spell, and send them in to go get the artifact to bring it out to us.
That's fun,
right? That
that's the
I
fun
mean,
part.
right? That's D&D simulation. Did you actually have a meaningful encounter? Did you test your abilities? No, you ruthlessly found the one effective strategy that makes you not have the fun fight, but would actually be the what a smart, intelligent, thinking person working under this set of physics, and I use physics in quote marks, might do to try to otherwise, maximize the situation to his advantage.
Well, that's so helpful. I really like the use of the term physics to mean kind of the set of conditions that simulate the reality that you're talking about.
Right, exactly. I mean, the physics,
fiction.
I borrowed that
Yeah.
absolutely from the digital world, right? When they talk about the game engines and physics of the game engine, that's totally where I got that terminology from.
You're bringing up like threads from the old Wizards of the Coast forums from way back in like my freshman high school days, and I'm just like I'm getting like deep nostalgia for that old ugly like early 2000s kind of web forum. I don't know. I have no reason to bring that up except to say thank you for that.
As more and more games seem to move away from the crunch that I see that everything was founded on, what's your opinion on as that kind of becomes more of the norm? Do you miss the crunch? Are you more embracing of it?
When I first started as a designer, I was very crunch favorable. I recognize that a lot of our audience was very interested in diving into the deep end of simulation, or at least feeling like they were simulating something, and having many options and very crunchy options available to them for character builds and character options. I have come to appreciate lighter games. In the last 10, 15, 20 years, whatever it is, just because of the time constraint, right? It takes a lot more time to prep a game that's going to be crunchy than it does to prep a game that's going to be kind of light and more freewheeling and more friendly for improvisation. I sort of feel that in some ways, I do like D&D 5e quite a lot. But most of the people I play with are still playing in variations of third edition or Pathfinder because they're guys who still like the crunch. Um, I sort of feel that, if D&D 5e had been completely in my hands, I think I would have tried to go for a best of all editions uh, vibe, where we might take some good lessons from fourth edition and good lessons from third edition and good lessons from second edition, and try to wrap those all up and make that the state of the D&D game. I think there's things that fourth edition did very well. For example, as much as we tend to look back and deride it, uh, I think somewhat unfairly, boy, fourth edition was easy to DM. And running monsters in fourth edition was a fun thing for the DM to do, more so than running monsters in 5e is for the DM, because the monsters in 5e are you know the design of monsters is getting better and more thorough, but at least out the gate, they just didn't do much other than uh, be bags of hit points and damage. Whereas 4e was some of the scripting that you could accomplish with monster powers and monster rolls, I think made setting up interesting fights much easier in the 4e world.
I do love that idea because as much as I disliked fourth edition, I played it and there are certain things from it that are just really brilliant in terms of design and and like you were saying, very much underappreciated. I think what you're seeing now, especially, is and your criticism of fifth edition is dead on in that regard, where fifth edition feels like you're hitting it with a random stick, and the if enemies are just kind of hitting you back with a different shaped stick, whether it be a spell or a sword or something like that. Rambling aside, what I've been seeing is this movement more towards a kind of cinematic direction when it comes to enemies and monster design. When you were talking about fourth edition, with the idea that once something is bloodied, the battle changes, right? And regardless of the mechanics of that, that's exciting. That's exciting for the players and exciting for the DM, because now it's a real indicator that something in the battle has changed. Something about this encounter has demonstrably changed. I just wanted to ask you, have you ever heard of Matt Colville?
Yeah, I think we actually very briefly worked together. I think he was part of the last Unicorn games,
Mm-hmm.
way back in the day.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and there was a brief time of a few months where Wizards of the Coast bought out those guys, um, for a bit, mostly because I think they were trying to get their hands on one of the licenses that Last Unicorn had, and it just didn't work out, and we just they were spun off to do their own thing. But yes, we were very briefly coworkers.
That's so he's been really great on YouTube lately, and in general. I'm sure he's a fabulous person. But more importantly, he had this video that talks about enemy design and how it's more about story beats and how that
Yeah,
makes the game a lot more interesting. And that's the kind of thing that I would love to see more of, is less, roll dice back and forth kind of to varying effect, but also just like, no, this is going to be a unique, interesting encounter that's different and fits the story and the monster.
yeah, I do agree with that. And story beats is a great way of putting it, right? That a fight is a story, right? It's a dialogue in a lot of ways, and you want there to be noteworthy and distinguishable parts of the dialogue where people get a chance to make a statement.
Absolutely. I mean, I
Yeah,
think anyone who's a fan of boxing or mixed martial arts can sit there and pick apart a fight and be like, oh, well, look at, like he kept hitting him with leg kicks. And then you finally see how that ended up working, or actually more aptly, probably professional wrestling, like when you're hitting someone in a particular part so you can hit them with the finishing move later on. I mean, that's like the drama and the excitement, and the analysis that you have through the fight is.
So I wanted to draw some attention to your ridiculously long writing history, and that we have a man under 100 years old who has 17 novels and many more coming, I'm sure. But what I think is really interesting in your story is how you started writing, and if I have the count right, you had an initial novel called Kingslayer that didn't get published, and then two other novels that got axed by.
Oh gosh, yes.
Yeah. So can you talk about that? And also, like, how did you manage to continue writing? Like, how did that not crush your aspiring author spirit so future writers can also know how to survive?
Well, so the first book I wrote, I started it shortly after graduating from college. So I was working on it during my Navy days. Kingslayer wound up being I don't know, like a 220,000 word fantasy epic. And I will say this. I mean, if I were to go back and look at it now, I would think it's probably not terribly good. But the the process of writing a book from start to the end teaches you what it takes to write a book. Right? It teaches you the discipline of writing, the necessity of chipping away at it every routinely sticking to a schedule, learning how to not get hung up on getting something exactly right the first time, and to trust the revision process so that you keep making progress. And I tell myself even to this day all the time, if I'm hung up on a tough chapter or a tough scene, I say, okay, let's just assume, Rich, that you were smarter a couple of months ago when you worked on the outline. Stick to the outline, just make it happen, and we can always come back and look at this again and improve it. But rather than try to find the exact right word, just get a word in place and keep moving. You can always come back and make it better. So yeah, Kingslayer. I wrote the book. I shopped it around. Uh, Probably very wisely. No particular agent or publisher wanted anything to do with it. But I did actually manage to teach myself something about what it takes to write a book, and later on, I was able to incorporate some elements of the world I'd come up with for Kingslayer in the birthright setting. Um, and then, speaking of the birthright setting, the first two novels I wrote that were going to be published, where I actually had a contract and a publication date, were The Falcon and the Wolf
Mhm.
for the birthright setting, and The Shadowstone for the birthright setting. Now, the funny story about the Falcon and the Wolf is, as TSR was gearing up to launch the birthright setting, I could kind of tell, hey, sooner or later they're going to want to have a fiction line to go with this world setting, because that's just the way TSR was rolling at the time. Hey, there was Forgotten Realms, the setting. There was Forgotten Realms, the novels. They're Dark Sun the setting, Dark Sun the novels. If we're doing a new world, we're going to want to do a full court press and see both novel, fiction and game products for this. So I was down, and Brian Thompson, our TSR's editor at the time, managing editor, I was down at his office. Saw every couple days, hey, I want a chance to write one of the novels for this setting, and Brian, the first couple times, well, we're actually not planning on doing fiction, and sure enough, the day came around that I had long foreseen, where they said, hey, change of plans. We've now been told we're going to do fiction for the line. And I was like, great, hey, I'm ready to go. And they told me, hey, we're sorry, but you're unpublished. You've never been published as an author. We have to go with somebody that we trust
Oh.
as who has a history. And I was like, because at this point we need to have it done in
Mhm.
4.5, 5 months. It's like, well, if you had just let me do it months ago when I told you I was ready to write a book for this setting, we wouldn't be in this situation. But
And
That's
it's all about
heartbreaking.
marketability at that point, right?
yeah,
Oh.
yeah, yeah, and
Yeah.
and and once again, I look back on the Falcon and the Wolf, and it's like, okay, it was certainly better than Kingslayer, but I could do better than that.
Mm.
Now. Um, But
So
yeah, sure enough, eventually 4 books into the Birthright book line, after several other established authors had a chance to do novels for Birthright, they finally gave me a whack at getting a Birthright book, and I did The Falcon and the Wolf, and they liked it enough that they gave me the Shadowstone, the opportunity to do the Shadowstone next. And Shadowstone, I think, in a lot of ways, is the first decent book I wrote. So that's the message: is, hey, third time's a charm, right?
don't give up, basically.
Don't give up. You get better. Practice makes perfect, right? Repetition, muscle memory, whatever it is. Eventually, you kind of start figuring out what you need to do. Um, so yeah, Falcon and the Wolf and the Shadowstone were kind of both in the hopper, and we're in the production pipeline for publication. And Falcon and the Wolf was scheduled for publication late in '96, and Shadowstone for middle of '97. And then, of course, at the end of '96, TSR went into vapor lock and stopped publishing because
Oh,
they had a complete money crunch and just were the wheels are coming off the cart. So my book got delayed, and shortly after Wizards of the Coast bought TSR, and they came around and looked at the slate of novels that were in the works and where the different parts of the business were. They made the decision that the Birthright book line was not profitable. And so, yes, in one awful meeting at which I was not present, they said, well, we're just going to cancel all the rest of these.
oh, that's
Oh,
heartbreaking.
talk about
Heartbreaking.
heartbreak. Oh my
God.
God.
I will say
Yeah.
this: Brian Thompson left the meeting at that point, and before anybody else did anything, he came and told me in person, "I'm really, really
Wow.
sorry. Here's what happened."
It's like killing a baby right in front of you.
Yeah. So I mean,
Oh, two of them.
there some of my coworkers had a hard time working with Brian, but I always appreciated that.
Jeez.
He was willing to put a stop to the meeting and say, "I have to go tell this guy now. I'm not going to have this come around to Rich from some other direction."
That's a real decent human right there. I mean that
Stand-up
genuinely.
guy.
Yeah.
That's seriously, yeah.
To my understanding, your why D&D has feats and everything. Did you know it was going to be such a huge thing, or did it just take off?
Did I know it was going to be a huge thing? Initially, I would say no. I didn't know it was going to be as big as it was, but I certainly recognized that it was going to be a very significant part of the game very early on. Feats grew out of an idea when Monty Cook, Skip Williams, and myself were doing the initial design work on third edition. And we got around to, we were evaluating like every single system in second edition, literally going through the player's handbook and DM guide, like page by page, and saying, how should this thing here on this page work in the new edition we're creating? And the thing that Feats started off with, that was a answer to the question of what are non-weapon proficiencies for. Those had popped up like in the Dungeoneer's Survival Guide in first edition. We came to realize that there were some of those that were kind of, pointless, or were not things that people would make mechanical investments in if they had any concern at all about their character being good. And there were others that were definitely good and seemed more valuable. So we kind of sorted those out at that time into, skill, proficiencies and super proficiencies. And yeah, it was my idea when looking at the super proficiencies and saying, I think there's actually a whole bunch of like combat-y type stuff we could bolt into these, for like combat styles and tactics. And I wrote up a proposal and kind of came back, and many of the feats that were, in the third edition, from the outset, like the power attack chain, um, the mounted combat chain, things like that, came from that initial, system proposal doc that I created. Although I had lots of funny placeholder names on them. So, for example, Spring Attack in my proposal document was known for many months as "Sucks to be you."
I'd rather that name. That's awesome.
I agree. I'd much rather that name. It's kind of like when you see certain skills in other RPGs that are like, oh, you don't roll to attack, you roll to murder. Like it's always before we roll into the World Build Jam, Rich, I do have to ask because you're the author or at least co-author of two of my favorite adventures of all time, which is Forge of Fury and the Red Hand of Doom. And
Awesome.
yeah, I'm gonna a little bit of inside baseball here. I emailed you because I was going through my RPG books and I pulled out Forge of Fury and I was like, man, I fucking love this adventure. And I looked down, I'm like, I should interview Rich Baker. That sounds like a cool idea. That is actually the reason I emailed you in the first place. I mean, to start up. But anyway, I want to ask, how do you infuse so much flavor and ecosystem and world building in the adventures that you have there? Is it any different than writing a book? And if so, how?
Well, it's certainly different than writing a book, just because when you're working on a novel, you have a character to work with, right? You have a point of view. You have somebody who is making decisions, and you know what decisions they're going to make. In the case of writing an adventure, you are building a set and casting a villain, and then stepping back to see what somebody comes and does when they step in to ad lib the role of being the hero. You have no idea what they're going to do or how they're going to do it. Uh, it could be anything. So it is a little bit different. But once again, I mean, I think it's a matter of concentrating on the stuff that's player facing, looking for distinctive villains, looking for distinctive monsters. What I have often done when I'm confronted with writing adventures, I actually, crazy as it sounds, because I know I've written some adventures that are very highly regarded. I kind of don't really like writing adventures because it's hard. It's difficult. It really is. It's a very challenging form of writing. It's hard to write a good adventure, at least for me anyway. Some people do it maybe more easily. But my step would usually be to kind of sit down when I'm confronted with a task. I was looking at my schedule. Well, I guess I got to work on this now. Um, I would try to close my eyes and sit back and think, okay, what haven't I seen done quite yet? What's an adventure that I think we haven't seen a lot of recently? What's a so Forge of Fury was part of the early third edition Return to the Dungeon motif, right? Where many adventures that came out, a couple of guys in the creative department, like myself and Monty Cook and a couple of other folks were pretty committed to the idea that D&D had gotten away from the dungeon towards the end of second edition, and we were trying hard to kind of bring it back and steer it in that direction. So right around the time of the end of second edition, beginning of third edition, we were trying to work on crafting good, well done dungeon crawls and make them things that people would remember and enjoy.
I think that you definitely succeeded. I've never run full dungeons like wholesale, but I can tell you for sure that I've stolen more from you than most, I'd probably say. And speaking of, we are now at the part of our interview where we're going to roll into the world building jam.
Awesome.
This, I'm very excited for this because the way that this is going to work is we have our handy little worksheet that we have here. We're going to roll some dice and then we're going to create a scenario based on those dice rolls. So first we're going to roll the genre, whether it be between science fiction, fantasy, horror, modern day, romance, or a new one, a superhero genre. We also have the subject, whether it be an item, a monster, a place, a historical figure, an event, or a combination of the two. Then we have the theme, which is madness, sacrifice, love, metamorphosis, pride and honor, the unspeakable, triumph, and finally hope. So we're going to start there. And then once all that's done, we're going to create a little bit of a scenario. And then we're going to roll on the twist table to fuck up all of our hard work. So first things first, we're going to roll for the genre, which is superhero. How about that? Okay.
All right.
And for the subject, we have, let's see, that's a monster. And then we have the theme, which is the unspeakable.
Oh.
All right, Rich. So we have a superhero genre. We have a monster, and then the unspeakable as the theme. So, as the guest, you have the first digs. So, please, by all means, go right ahead.
I think this, based on those three things, Justice League versus Cthulhu,
Oh,
Yes.
right?
okay.
I mean, we don't see. I mean, we do see superheroes fighting monsters pretty often with, things like werewolves and vampires. Vampires in are certainly present in DC and Marvel comics and things like that. Um, but when you threw in the unspeakable twist, I immediately ran towards Lovecraft, and it's like I don't think I've seen a mashup of superheroes and Cthulhu, Lovecrafty type stuff, which is really fascinating because those seem like two giant genres, and I'm surprised they haven't been mashed together yet by somebody. So that's where I
Well,
went to.
I love the start because you're right. Because I think that the major takeaway from both is like superheroes especially are often some kind of a power fantasy, and when it comes to Lovecraftian literature it often comes down to stripping away any power in the face of the endless void of the cosmos, right? So
Yeah.
how do you take someone who is a god on their planet and strip away all of that power and force them to face the endless ocean of stars?
I mean, Superman can be affected by magic, so is
Well,
Cthulhu
right.
magic?
Cthulhu is beyond magic, so I'm going to say yes for the terms of getting around his damage reduction type, Chris. But more importantly, like what kind of a monster are we going to create here that is Lovecraftian in design and also maybe preys on superheroes? What do you think?
uh, Something dimensional that objects to superheroes messing around with time travel and teleportation, because that's
Oh,
a staple in a lot of superhero stories. So if a Hound of Tendalos came looking for the Flash after after he zips off to go mess with the past, or like he does sometimes, I think that'd be kind of interesting.
I
that
think.
yeah,
Oh, sorry.
go ahead, Daniel. No, go
I was
ahead.
going to say, I think another concern with, especially with Cthulhu-esque beings, is that superheroes generally are fighting villains who have coherent plans and motivations and wants, whereas Cthulhu is generally described as an entity that has an unknowable intent, and that it's completely indifferent to humankind. So I think one of the challenges these superheroes would face is the fact that their enemy just isn't really interested in them, and the destruction it causes is completely incidental because it sees them as ants.
Or if and not even ants, right? If it's a question of um, oh, I'm thinking of like the Lovecraft story, The Crawling Chaos,
Yes.
which kind of
Hmm.
describes the world essentially going mad because Nyarlathotep has come into the world and is preaching
Hmm.
a message of insanity that is catching it like wildfire in the population. Right, people are just going nuts. So if
Yes.
you put the superheroes in a world where they're trying to protect the world, but the world is destroying itself because of the madness imposed on it by
Mhm.
this invasion of creatures that they can't necessarily punch or find or even perceive. Uh, there's definitely something there.
Oh,
Exactly.
for sure. And then I think if you wanted to bring it back to, the way that you were manipulating time and space, the idea of this being something that, the Flash brought with him, like it just so happened to, he tore through a part of space time that was just so happened to be infected by madness or something like that. And it's a matter of you are now a plague bringer unto the universe that you've never seen before.
Something that existed before time.
It's
Oh
it,
man.
it's a little bit of a riff, but um, the Star Trek Next Generation episode where Lieutenant Barclay is scared of the thing in the transporter beam. Man, that was really creepy, right? It was a story device that everyone was just so comfortable with that you never gave it a second look until Barclay started seeing horrible things come out of it, right?
Yes.
It's,
Yes. Exactly. I like the idea of an encounter with the unknown kind of piggybacking its way and infecting the rational world and disentangling it.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's the affliction? I don't want it to just be random rage virus. So let's kind of workshop that idea a little bit more. What's the affliction that this madness is causing?
You see the finality of everything. or you're able to see people as both being dead and alive, and so you no longer view them as people, really.
Ooh, lack of empathy.
I mean, it's a matter of your shifting of time and perspective, right? uh or maybe it's something even simpler than that, like you don't see things in like or like you see things as an infrared or something like that. But I think Chris's idea is certainly much stronger than that.
Why would I save them? It's meaningless. They'll just die in 30 years anyway.
Apathy.
When you look at everyone and you've already seen them dead because you watched how they die.
Oh,
Oh
I like
God,
that. Yeah.
that's horrifying.
It's like a future
Jesus.
sight everyone suddenly has, and they kind of give up, and then cities start to fall apart, and the superheroes, they can't use their powers to save them. They have to figure some other way to do that.
Overwhelming apathy at the face of the inevitable.
Yeah,
Oh,
and the superheroes are the only ones who are strong enough to resist the apathy long enough to be able to face the threat.
and of course, not all superheroes, because you know that some of
Yes.
them are going to
Go
look
bad.
out and see all of the people that they can't save.
Yes. Yes, I love it.
Oh, all right.
In
With
some way, the
that,
most powerful superheroes would be most at risk.
Yes,
The
like
guys with
Superman
the
would
highest
be
wow,
a threat.
expectations
Yeah.
would be
man,
most in jeopardy of losing hope.
Except for
that's
Superman.
Owlman.
woo.
Owlman would survive.
Oh man.
Yeah,
Okay.
Batman
All
would be
right.
I mean,
fine because
Batman
he's
would be like,
cynical.
whatever. It's a day at the office, right? I
Yes.
mean,
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Yep.
Okay, so with that, I literally just got goosebumps thinking about that, by the way. But with that said, we're now going to throw in a twist and see just how bad we can fuck things up. So let's go ahead and roll the twist. Aliens did it. Well,
Of
that's
course.
kind of already
Well,
something that
that's kind of
happened.
the
So
assumption.
roll that, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna roll that again. Damn it. Okay, now add in some treachery. Okay, that's
Oh.
interesting. Okay.
Was it caused by a superhero in the beginning?
Well, I mean, it was.
Yeah. Oh, inadvertently.
Yeah. So, Rich, why don't you take that one? So now add in some treachery. Who's working with this unspeakable horror from beyond space and time?
so the crazy twist uh, that treachery put in my head was the idea of um, treachery in the other direction,
Oh.
meaning that it turns out in the superhero world that the guy that you really need to help in this situation is a really nasty, awful supervillain,
Oh, nice. Because they're
Yeah.
completely the opposite. Oh, that's perfect.
right? Because it
Oh,
turns out that maybe Doctor Doom is the guy who might
yeah.
have the magic or the tech that you need to turn against these things.
So your
I.
treachery to your own people in order to save the world.
Yeah,
Mhm,
and
mhm.
maybe here would be something awful, right? If Doctor Doom's asking price is, oh, I don't know, uh, you know, Western Europe or something,
Yes.
Oh yeah,
right?
yeah.
It's like,
Latveria
well,
is
we
not
had to
enough.
let Doctor
Yep.
Doom have Iberia,
Oh, that's great.
Oh
but we
man,
did
that's
say the
great.
world from Cthulhu.
That's
Yeah.
very that's very Watchmen, right? You know.
Oh yeah. That's excellent. That's adding in some depth that I really love. That's awesome. Uh, we're not going to do much better than that, are we, gentlemen?
I don't think so.
No. So with that, we're now going to roll into the rapid fire portion of this podcast. Rich, my wife really wants to know: is cereal a soup?
Is cereal a soup? No.
Okay. And
Yes.
what have you been playing recently?
I'm a huge fan of Civilization. So my that's my big time killer is stomping around in Civilization 6, building empires.
Oh my
In
God,
terms
yes.
of RPG stuff, I play. I'm in a regular Thursday night Pathfinder game. I'm in a Wednesday night D&D 5e game, um, and I tend to prefer to play big bashy brutes. I don't have to think real hard. So maybe I'm working out some
Yeah,
frustrations.
absolutely. And tell me about your favorite or most memorable character death.
Oh, most memorable character death. Hmm. I had I played a dwarven sorcerer up to like 16th level in a campaign that uh, my friend Steve Schubert, one of my fellow Sasquatches, is running. It was one of the various Rune Lord arcs, I guess, for the Pathfinder and Adventure Path. Um, and we had to fight a really big, scary red dragon. and I was kind of caught in the open, and I managed to save myself from a 100 points of fire damage or whatever, because his breath weapon was just
God.
like awful. It was like 110, 120 damage right every time he breathed, and I used wall of stone, stone shape or wall of stone, to put a hemisphere of stone up and make a little igloo around myself. But then I um, popped out just long enough to throw another big spell at him, and hadn't yet ducked back into my little igloo when the dragon caught me in the open and just scorched me.
Oh.
Just
Oh, jeez.
it's like, I had the igloo. Why did I leave it?
Oh.
Oh,
Those
the
are
stone
some famous
igloo. I
last
was
words.
safe.
Yeah.
All right, and Nate, why don't you go ahead and plug someone else who is not you?
Plug someone else who is not me. Trying to think of who I'm reading recently that sticks out. I'll probably butcher the name. N.K. Jemisin. Forgive me if I pronounce it incorrectly. And let me see if I can get. The Broken Earth series. That's the name of it. The 5th season, Obelisk Gate, and the Stone Sky. Really good, interesting world building. Fascinating world premise. Interesting magic system. I have been enjoying those quite a lot.
That's excellent. And Daniel, go ahead.
I got one silly question and one serious question. So, a serious question first. What is your number one fiction pet peeve or writing pet peeve?
Yes.
Fiction pet peeve. The author that gives us the character description by having somebody stop to regard themselves in a mirror.
Oh, I hate that.
Oh my
Oh,
God.
awful.
And
So cheap.
it's funny. I see it again and again and again, and sometimes from people who ought to know better.
Oh, Jesus.
But
And then
That's
yeah,
that's
that one
terrible.
bugs me.
Number two is so since you're the grandfather of feats, what is the dumbest feat or proficiency either you invented or that you've come across?
Oh, the dumbest one? Wow. I mean,
Just like useless feat that you just had to include, but it's just pointless.
wow. I mean, there are various skill focused feats that are very unlikely to come into play.
Oh,
Right?
don't say Iron Will.
No, no. I mean, in some ways, I'm a little bit bummed by feats like toughness and iron will and such, because they're so boring. But um, for monsters, if you're in a system where monsters get feats too, it's super handy to be able to give a monster a feat that the DM doesn't have to think about how to apply or when to use. Right. So those are kind of handy there. I don't really think they're dumb. They're just unexciting. Stupidest feat. There are definitely some really like crazy narrow feats that are like, hey, if you are fighting on the deck of a ship, you get a +2 on checks to climb ropes and to disarm people.
That's a
It's
good
like,
one.
okay.
well, I
All
mean,
right.
okay, yeah, I mean, I see
Gotta make
what you were trying to do there, but man, how often in the 13 months you're going to play this game, how many sessions are going to involve me standing on the deck of a ship?
right. And then climbing the
By a
rope.
ship of quite a bit.
Yeah. All right. Rich Baker, thank you so very much. Why don't you go ahead and tell people where they can find you and your work?
Well, I do have a website, richardbakerauthor.com. You can find my military science fiction. Scornful Stars, I mentioned, was out, not all that long ago. Although this year sure seems to be getting long.
It just
Uh,
feels longer than it actually is.
yeah,
Yeah.
but most good sized bookstores will be have Scornful Stars on the shelves, and I don't know exactly when my Torg novel will be published, but I have the first one. It's called Maelstrom Bridge. It's done and edited, and it's just a matter of when the good folks at Ulysses are going to figure it's the right time and format to put it out in the bookstores. So,
All right. Rich Baker, thank you so very much for joining us. It's been a real honor to have you on.
it's fun to do this. I love the exercise, and I'm actually really proud of what we came up with in a hurry. So,
Absolutely. All right. And that was our interview with Rich Baker. Gentlemen, that interview was a lot of fun. I don't know about you, but I obviously can't help but fanboy out just a little bit, considering he wrote two of my favorite adventures and also invented feats, apparently, which I did not know.
And he's so cool, like as a guy.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. That was a really great interview. Man, lots of information, I feel like that was a dense interview. A lot of cool stuff that you can kind of glean from that. What do you think?
What did he say? Spring Attack was originally called Get Fucked or Sucks to Be You? Sucks
Get
to be you.
fucked.
Sucks to be you.
I wish it was called Get Fucked.
Yeah.
That'll be 5.5.
Yeah, exactly. Once we the next homebrew we do, one of the feats will be Get Fucked, Idiot. And
it's like inspired by Richard Baker.
Yeah. Oh man.
I think what's really important about Richard Baker as a person in particular is that he represents kind of a chunk of knowledge about the early days of role playing that is quickly being lost over time. So he is a treasure to us all.
Absolutely. And not only that, but I mean, his longevity, I mean, he's made it through second, third, 3.5, fourth, and fifth edition. His
talk about perspective.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's a testament to his talent and his like design and desire to be in this industry. And it's so fucking cool to be able to learn from him, all the stuff that we did.
Plus he got the skinny on Gary Gygax, from what we understand.
And I think that'll just about wrap it up for this episode. Remember that if you want to go ahead and send us an email with a cool world building prompt, you can go ahead and do so by sending an email to worldbuildwithus@gmail.com. Alternatively, you can go ahead and send us a tweet at Let's Worldbuild, and you can have one of your cool ideas pop up on the show like we do every week. Well, not every week. Some weeks we get to interview legendary game designers like Rich Baker. But that'll just about do it for this episode. Remember that we love you very much, and we're going to make it through the week together.